This is the Outpost RBA podcast, where we lead security teams to higher ground and new perspectives needed to secure the frontiers of enterprise, with hosts Will Robus and Stuart McIntosh.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Outpost RBA podcast, Securing the Frontiers of Enterprise. I'm Will Robus, and with me here, as always, is Stuart McIntosh. Stuart, how are you doing today?
Good. Excited for this one. I love messy industry terms that everyone knows, but no one knows why.
Nice. Well, I'm excited too. And actually, before we get into kind of the housekeeping announcements, this is actually the first episode that we're recording since we released the podcast. So first and foremost, we want to thank everyone who has listened, everyone who's given feedback, everyone who's liked and followed. This started kind of as an experiment for Stuart and I, mostly just to talk about things that we talk about with customers, we talk about internally on a consistent basis. We wanted to share some of those conversations and learnings and perspectives. So again, we really, really appreciate everyone listening and following. I mean, I'll speak for Stuart. I think we were a little surprised and overwhelmed by the positive response, which is great because, like I said, we didn't really know what to expect. What are some of the things that you've been hearing, Stuart?
I think it's just that it's a different conversation. I think a lot of content that's out there is super technical or task oriented as opposed to thinking oriented. Like, how do we approach situations as opposed to, hey, turn this on, disable this. And I think that I was surprised that people want those conversations, and I'm delighted they are, because it's the stuff that I think helps programs move.
Helps programs and really makes a difference. And that's what we want all our conversations to center around, is how do we move the needle? How do we make not just progress, but how do we redefine what we do in defensive security from a durable and impactful standpoint. So there are a couple of ways to get involved with some of the groups in the community that we've built out. The first one is the RBA Community. That's a website, is kind of the central gathering point for that. It's rba.community. It's a very active and growing group. The central kind of asset there from a communication and a dialogue standpoint is the Outpost Slack channel. So that is linked at the RBA Community site. We've got people joining every week. I think we're pushing 700, almost 800 people globally. Most of them are kind of security practitioners on the defensive side. So threat detection, some security engineers, as well as people in the SOC or managing SOCs on the security alerting and incident response side. So full of people from large organizations, people from small companies. We've got Splunkers as well as Splunk partners there. Really, it's the collection point for all of the RBA experts. As Stuart likes to say, I think pretty much anyone that's given a .conf talk on RBA is a part of the community and very active in answering questions. One of the Splunkers took a unofficial metric, and he said about if someone posts a question or an issue in that Slack, the average response time is between 10 and 15 minutes. So very active, which is cool to see. So yeah, definitely look at rba.community, join up the Slack group. There's also pretty consistent events that the community puts on, at least once a month. Sometimes a couple per month. The kind of the staple is a meetup to help people get connected and get started with RBA. We've modified the format a little bit, so there might be some content. We always try to save some room for questions and answers, more of an open dialogue. We had kind of a leadership topic, I think, in the last one, where we had Jimmy Mills from Texas Instruments. He's the CISO there, talking about his experience. He's been doing RBA for a long time, probably pushing 4 years or more. Stuart shaking his head. And then actually we hope to have Jimmy on an episode of this podcast in the near future too. So a great kind of cadence of content coming out of there, both technical enablement as well as kind of process and people oriented. So the other opportunity coming up quickly as of the recording of this episode is Splunk's annual .conf in Vegas. We will be there hosting a in real life meetup on the Monday, just before the keynote from Splunk CEO. So if you're going out to .conf, try to get there on Monday morning or earlier, so you can meet up with us near the Splunk.conf site and kind of network and meet some people face to face. We're excited about that because we've been doing Outpost. Most of it was during COVID. So we've worked with a lot of people, a lot of companies, as well as Splunkers. And this is one of our, not our first chance, but one of the handful of chances we've had to meet people in real life and connect the faces and real life faces with what we see on Zoom and email and everything like that. So with that, we can get into our main topic today, which we are calling maturity actually. Maybe a little spin-off of the movie title, but maturity in air quotes is always a subject that comes up when we're talking with security programs, with partners, pretty much anybody about their program where they're at currently. It's a good thing that, go ahead.
I think the only word that comes up more often than maturity is use case. I think that, so we'll table that for another overused comment, but yeah, it's in every conversation.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we're bringing this up today is we don't really like the word or how it's used, and we'll get into that a little bit. We'll unpack that a little bit more, but one of the reasons is we see maturity being framed as essentially a test, and a lot or almost all of the tests come from vendors, and it's a bit of a slippery slope. Of course, everyone wants to know how they can get better. Everyone wants to have a baseline of where they're at. But when you turn maturity into a test, nobody wants to fail a test. Nobody wants to get the answers wrong. We all want to feel good about the results and have some actionable things that will help us get better. But what we see, and from a practical standpoint, if a vendor is wanting you to leverage their tool set or their services, they're kind of incentivized for you to do poorly on the test, because a lot of times they come back and say, oh, well, you didn't do very well on this and you have a lot of work to do or a lot of opportunity to get better. But by the way, if you want to get an easy A, you just, if you just put in our platform, subscribe to our service, then we can get you a passing or an exemplary grade very, very quickly, which is a bit of a gaming, we think. And of course, as a security practice ourselves, we design products and services to get customers level up as quickly as possible. But the FUD is not the way to do it. And a maturity model is sometimes wielded more as a weapon than it is kind of a positive path forward. What is that? Any color you can add to that, Stuart, based on your years of experience in security?
Because I've been pulled into a lot of these to help customers, as well as when I was a part of a program, I was usually a part of they call them interviews. And you always know one's coming up because you'll end up with 15 interview blocks on your calendar. And each interview is a separate section. Like today, we're going to talk about policies. And tomorrow we're going to talk about alerting. That's how some of these go. We brought it up before. You got to look at the incentives. So if you're going to do one of these maturity reviews, look at who's doing it and what is their incentive for doing this. So if it's coming off of a product vendor, it's probably going to be graded about how much you use their product and potentially the way they want you to use their product. If you go with like a big four, like an audit firm or something like that, their incentive is to transition you to being a customer services. So it's one of these where you got to be upfront with, okay, who's grading the papers here and why would they pick certain grades? Because otherwise it quickly becomes a name and shame into purchasing. And they know that whenever there's one of these, it's a document meant to be shared with leadership. So it's almost like how to hotwire the acquisition process of something new. So I was a part of one of these. It was a big four accounting firm, and they came in, and this was after we were doing RBA. No one had heard of it. We explained the concept to them, and they actually they gave us a passing grade for our ability to detect and respond to threats. They gave us a C- because they said we had too low of alert volume to demonstrate that we were mature at detecting threats. And we pushed back on this, and we were like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. And they said, well, if you're interested, we have an entire senior practice around gaining greater visibility to your threats. And we were like, whatever, next. Like it doesn't, you hope for something actionable to grow. And what you get instead is almost like, here's all the ways you're not normal, or here's all the ways that you're subpar. And it feels very judgy. And I've done a lot of these, and they come off as criticism as opposed to coaching. None of them really feel like coaching.
So you had a good one-liner in there, and I think it was, what did you say? Game and shame? Or
name and shame.
Name and shame. Name and shame.
Yeah. Because usually there's a manager whose group is considered, because they'll never say you're failing. What they'll say is deficient. You're deficient in this area. And leadership will always go to that manager and say, I've given you all these resources. Why are you deficient? And it's like, we're not. It's their view. Yeah, but we hired them. We paid them money. It's like, yeah, but so yeah, the name and shame is frequently, as a security program, that's your hesitation to deal with audits and to deal with these maturity exercises. That's usually why you'll see people apprehensive about them.
All right. So let's take this opportunity to redefine maturity, if you will, from the standpoint of these tests. And that kind of gets to the root of the title and the theme of the episode is, from all of our experiences and working with all the different companies and environments and teams, what would you define, or what would you say is maturity actually?
And here, I don't mean to, everyone's here to eat. So it may seem like we're kind of bad mouthing these other ones. I think you have to know what you're in for, and does it match what you want? What some of our conversations with people with programs have shifted to is, what are your capabilities? So instead of saying, oh man, you have all of these alerts, instead, what I like looking at is, are you capable of developing a detection and deploying it for the SOC to use it? That's a capability. And that capability will get utilized with like new threats in the news, leveraging any threat hunting, leveraging pen tests or red teams. But specifically, it's this idea that there's capabilities that are necessary for a program. And some of them you need earlier, as foundational, like the ability to detect and respond. And some of them you may need later, like adversary simulation, threat hunting. I wouldn't call those foundational capabilities. They come later, but they're important if you want to continue to get stronger and faster as a program.
So, so really, and we don't like the word maturity because it lacks sort of context, right? It's all based on whatever you think the model is. So we've tried to unpack that from almost like a first principles approach to say, all right, so what are you good at? What is your team good at? What are you working on? What do you know that you need to improve on and that you're actively trying to improve? And then the third piece is what are your blind spots? What are there areas that you're ignoring that you might have on a backlog, but at essentially from a practical standpoint, you have kind of little, no capability or visibility or approach to right now. So those are kind of the three pillars of where you're at and where you're going. And is that, do you have any examples off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot with this, but kind of maybe the different ranges of those from the companies we've seen. So because everyone's at where they're at, and it's really up to the program to decide where they need to go next, and that's driven by the business requirements and priorities and things like that.
So I think what's great about those three questions, first of all, I love that they're open-ended because it's meant to be a dialogue, because that's where some of these aha moments happen, not only for us, but for them as well. And specifically starting with the strengths, like what are you proud of? What do you think you're absolutely crushing it at? These programs weren't like, they're never a blank canvas. Someone has put time, sweat, money into where they're at now. So let's highlight that. Let's make sure that we know, okay, that area they're really good at. And so we just met with a company. Their automation eclipsed companies where I see entire automation teams. I mean, it was really impressive what their ability to automatically respond to events, to alerts. It was impressive what their capability was. But where did they know they were weak? Adding better alerting. They knew that their level of self-awareness was, this is not a sustainable approach for us. We need to figure out how to get better at connecting events that feed our automation. So they knew that. And then some stuff they didn't know was a lot of the enrichments, a lot of the things they used to base their decisions on were inaccurate. Like, is this user account still with the company or not? So they had some foundational data stuff that they didn't realize was inaccurate. So it's through that exploration that we can say, hey, okay, this capability to respond, you're really strong at. But this capability to see, you're good at, but we definitely can get better. And then this capability of where are your data sources as far as your confidence in them or the accuracy of them. That's where we want to spend some time. And so I think it's really great because it's dialogue. It helps them kind of explore. It almost removes the shaming, which lets people be a little more vulnerable. The key to this is being honest and not putting up masks, not putting up barriers, not just washing over, it's fine, we're good, next. Like, the key is just kind of dropping that bridge a little bit and being a little vulnerable in the discussion. It's why we never record them as well, because we don't ever want people to have a fear that there'll be a repercussion of an exploratory conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm that concept of vulnerability is really, really important, and a point we definitely wanted to highlight, kind of along the lines of this maturity discussion. So I just remembered that, I mean, early on in the Outpost story, I mean, we developed essentially a maturity model, or maturity rubric, if you will, and attempted to leverage it with a couple of customers in order to be informative. But I mean, it didn't really land in it, and not only that, but we quickly learned that it's not really what the customers need, and it's not what's helpful. So from that learning, we don't talk about maturity. We talk about, all right, where are you at as a program, and where can we take you? And so our assessment approach is exactly that. Like, it's sort of this naked deep dive into their Splunk environment, to their security program from a technical environment standpoint, architecture standpoint. So, I mean, we look at all of the end-to-end pieces, but I
think one of the things that's nice, we start off before we touch a screen, before we do anything technical, we have a dialogue about what are you being asked to do as a security program? Like, how do you fit in your business? How does the business view security? And I think where that's important is, one of the areas that I never accounted for was that there were entire security teams dedicated to product security for some of these software as a service companies. Well, that's a completely different charge of what to protect than what I call corporate security, which are like devices and employees and contractors. Instead, there's very few user accounts. It's very dynamic. But it's very different. But they still have to ensure that it's protected, it's not being abused, it's not being defrauded. And so that, starting with the business discussion about kind of those three questions, right? Like, okay, as a business unit, where are you good? Where do you want to get to, or where do you want to improve? And then what might be some blind spots or things that maybe give you some angst? And then going into this technical, what we can do is actually say, is your technology supporting all of those assumptions we met up above? Do we see in the technical execution what we talked about before, or what would need to adjust to meet what was said before?
Yeah, and from a kind of a bottom-up foundational approach, right? We know that there's these foundational blocks that create a strong foundation that give you an ability to leverage this massive amount of data at scale and keep it in the context. And so it's not a maturity piece as much as how strong is your foundation, and what do you need to do to make it stronger, or at least a strong baseline of building out the rest of this capability as well as your program. And you can only assess that, you can only give feedback on that if the customer is willing to kind of be vulnerable and almost, be naked from a technical standpoint. I think when we were approaching, or no, you kicked off one of these reviews, and it was more of a Splunk engineer or a security architect. And what was their, what did they say coming into it?
So whenever we do kind of these meetings, we try to align expectations right up front so that everyone knows, why are we on this call? What do we all hope to get out of it? And as we were kind of wrapping that up, the admin actually said, hey, they were excited to hear what they were getting right, like that pride thing, like, hey, like, we put a lot of effort in here. And then immediately said, but very nervous to hear we're not doing right. So it was kind of this, like, I guess it's butterflies, because it's some enthusiasm and some scariness, but to me, it definitely kind of summed up what this experience can feel like before we kind of start heading down it.
Yeah, it's like presenting a project or presenting a body of work that you've done to an audience, and you're excited to share it, but you're also nervous about the critics, or if someone's gonna be like, this is junk and you're an idiot, right? Like nobody wants that.
And I think I really think it's important to give space for that, to let them, like, it was great that they were able to verbalize that, because I have it too. When I go into these, I constantly am nervous. Like, what if I have nothing that helps them? Or what if this experience, they just don't enjoy it all, or they think it's a waste of their, like, I'm right there with them. So it's nice when we can kind of just both give each other the nod. Yep. But we're in this together. Like, we've got this. We're both trying to help each other and learn and grow. Let's just be candid.
So, I mean, we've already kind of evolved the idea of maturity into more of, we'll call it an assessment that includes a baseline of sorts. You know, we've got these building blocks that are very attainable. I mean, what we look at, especially in Splunk and enterprise security, is, hey, it has all this power and functionality. Let's make sure you are leveraging it to its full capability, since number one, you're paying for it, and number two, you have the data and the information. Now let's just start building these blocks so we can stitch it all together. So what, I mean, this information and this path forward and these opportunities to improve, we really want to be in the forefront of any kind of roadmap, or, you know, I'm trying not to say maturity, but
it's the word of the day. Come on.
I know we're stuck on it, but let's call it a program progression, right? Or a build out or whatever. So maybe talk a little bit about how, through this exercise and through the results, we've seen the outputs become more of an asset, as opposed to this name and shame kind of approach.
I think what's really quick or what becomes apparent in these discussions is that this is about pouring pure gas on what they're doing. It's not an academic critique of their thought process. It's not, well, that's not pure zero trust, so how dare you say you're implementing zero trust? You know, it's not a study in how well you uphold a framework. Instead, it's about, again, back to capability. How can we help unlock new levels of you being you, like, to detect, to see things, to respond effectively. So it's less about a failing grade, and it's more about, by addressing these items, you will support the following goals of your program. So one example, and it's, you got to be honest about everything in your program, as well as the team. Like, if your team is not necessarily capable of writing all of that automation, let's be honest about it if that's a part of your program goal. Because we can help. We can show, hey, here's some resources for it. Here's what we've seen other people succeed with. But you get out of it what you're willing to put into it or share. And so we had this one customer, they were tired of all their portals. They said, listen, our analysts, there's like 15 tabs open to work a single alert because stuff's everywhere. And so as we were talking with them, we said, okay, why aren't you doing more of this out of Splunk ES? And one was they didn't know how, but the other was they had this experience where searches were always slow. Every time they used it, it was slow. So why would we bring everyone to this watering hole if it already sucks when not everyone's there? Well, we were able to quickly show what was eating that performance. There was stuff hiding that was eating it. And that's where it's not that you got it wrong. It's that, hey, I would update these 5 things, these 5 searches to be more efficient. And instantly their environment was a lot more responsive. And it got them excited that this is doable. This vision they had of a central location to investigate alerts, now there's some hope. Now there's some optimism. It's not 5 states away on a foot race. It's like down the street. We can do this. And I think that's one of the things that really gets unlocked with these kind of experiences we do, based on them admitting, here's where it's at, here's our hesitation. If they wouldn't have told me how hesitant they were or what they were feeling about that platform, maybe we would have found it, maybe we wouldn't have, but we definitely wouldn't know how important it was to them.
Yeah, I mean, brings the metaphor of throwing deck chairs off the Titanic to the forefront. And I like how you said pouring gas on what they're doing. And I want to unpack that just a little bit. So throwing maturity models out the window, right? With all of the environments we've been in, the teams we've worked with, I would say we tell them, advise them, help them to do 2 things. And it's always the same 2 things. And the first thing is, let's take the foundation that you have right now and strengthen it. Let's fill in the cracks. Let's beef it up to be as strong as possible. And the cool part is that work, once they know what it is, and especially given some of the tools and accelerators that we've developed, strengthening that foundation is a week-long process. Like it can be very, very fast. Again, because you're leveraging the infrastructure and the investment and the team that you have in place. So that foundational piece is super important, because that allows us to do the second thing, which is essentially bring all of this together, from a data standpoint, from a team standpoint, from a workflow and a process standpoint. And I mean, that's the only answer we ever give. And I mean, the details are different and the steps might be different, and where each team is at might be different, but the solution is the same. And with our experience, we've designed ways to deliver the most amount of impact in the shortest time possible. So you can kind of cherry pick and say, all right, we want to demonstrate this capability, or we want to demonstrate improvement here. So let's focus. Well, okay, if we want to do that in a couple of weeks, let's focus here, and we'll shore up this pieces of the foundation, and then string it all together and show you, and you can show your leadership exactly how this concept and this framework works, given all the stuff that you have and all the investment you've made to date. And that's what we've seen from a pure gas standpoint. And that's probably the most fun and exciting to see that happen with these teams, with security programs, no matter who they are or where they're at.
And we've seen, so this idea of taking first of all, identifying capabilities and then seeking ownership of that capability. So who is accountable for response, that the capability to respond to alerts? Frequently, when you and I talk to people, no one. Like no one knows that it is on them to own it. They know it's a problem. The analysts say it and know it. The engineers say it and know it. But who does it fall on to help define what this is as a capability? There's a customer we had. they had to submit tickets to a network team to block an IP. I totally get it. I've been there. Totally get it. But when an IP is attacking you and you have to go fill out this ticket that has like 30 different fields that have nothing to do with this request, but you better get them right. Otherwise, it'll balk at you and say, try again. And oh, by the way, you're doing this in the middle of the night because you just woke up. And the odds of a network person picking up a ticket like that in the middle of the night, they're not going to be happy. And are they going to get the block correct? So it's this idea of, okay, this is an important necessity to responding to alerts, is blocking external IPs across our network. Work with those owners to say, hey, we want to improve this. We don't want the burden on you, but we also don't want the service delay, but we do need to do this. Let's do a published block list. We'll control who can write to it. You control where it gets deployed, and let's test this out. So, but in order to get better at that response capability, someone has to own it. Someone has to help steer this to become more efficient, more effective than what they were doing before. And it can absolutely change programs. Now, all of a sudden, the network team appreciates that you're trying not to interrupt their work. And now all of a sudden, analysts are excited because they have an ability to affect attacks now. No one's gating them to say, well, are you smart enough to know that we should block this? Come on. Like, that's my job. That's what I do every day. And it changes emotions, it changes interactions, and it strengthens capability.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent kind of summation of the outcome of kind of throwing the maturity as defined by someone else, right? Whether it be a vendor or a thought leadership board or whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, these are useful rubrics to help you baseline and to make sure that you don't have blind spots, but they should be used almost as like mental models layered on top of each other and not.
And what's great about this idea of capability, so let's look at the ability to deploy detections as a capability, which essentially that capability says we have data and we have the ability to craft our own detections. We don't have to outsource it. We can do it ourselves, and it can clip into our alerting so that it can be processed. Whenever you go through an audit for COBIT, what are some other ones? PCI, ISO 27001, CMMC, what they're really asking are sometimes task level questions around capability. What they're really trying to say is, have you defined how to find newly released critical vulnerabilities in your environment? Well, back to the capability. Yeah, we have the ability to deploy custom detections very efficiently. And we have examples. So what you can do with this is it's almost like plug and play into any audits that you then have to attest to. Because if you focused on it as a process, as a capability, you can give consistent answers to every auditor. You can give consistent examples or demonstrate the process. And all of a sudden, now the auditors start easing back and you start getting better grades. I mean, let's face it, we want A's, and auditors don't like handing A's out. They do not like it. They are in the business of failing as many people as possible because that's their business. And so begrudgingly, they have to start giving you A's because it's consistent, it's constantly improving, and you're very aware. You're very aware of what's going on. And that's ultimately what most of these audits want.
Well, and that right there is the reason to take ownership of your maturity as you define it, because you're ultimately responsible for defending it, proving it,
Right.
and no vendor sits in an audit and defends you for the maturity model that they implemented, right? Like it's just
No.
that's never happened. So So yeah, kind of to wrap up in summary, a few points that I think really hopefully exemplify and enable kind of how you're thinking about this in your program is, first and foremost, take ownership of your maturity. Stuart's a big Jocko fan, and of course he has that book Extreme Ownership, which is a deep dive into the concept of it. But defining and owning your maturity as a program is really essentially the only choice you have to be ultimately successful. And again, not to dismiss all these other rubrics, use them as information and lenses, but it's up to you to really set the agenda and the requirements.
And I just want to caveat that when we say ownership in this scenario, we really mean accountable for its current and future state. What I don't mean is a land grab for a laundry list of things that I own as a leader. What I mean is it needs to be a level deeper, which is you hold accountability for where this is at and where it's going, and you help enable that progression. Because I think sometimes people get it met like my team owns response, and it's like, okay, if you're going to own it, you're accountable for figuring out how to do it more efficiently, more effectively, more comprehensively.
Which leads perfectly into the second point, which is if you have true accountability and take ownership of that, you also have to get comfortable with being vulnerable about it, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get to the truth on where you're at and how you can get better. So back to that, back to the comments that were made by one of the participants in the review, with the I'm excited and terrified. And it's not just a professional vulnerability, but I mean, it really is kind of a personal vulnerability.
It can be. Some of these jobs we take, we're spending more hours doing this job than sleeping. So how can we not feel some portion of ourselves, our own identity in this work that is now being judged? So yeah, you have to kind of go into it knowing it might suck, but this is how we get better.
Yeah. And that leads to kind of the third closing point, and that is the other reason we don't really care about maturity as we approach customers and teams is because it really doesn't matter. Where you're at doesn't matter. What really matters is that you care about getting better. And that we've seen time and time again.
And I think there's nuance to you getting better. There's a lot of stuff going on inside your company that other people cannot relate to, who are on the services side or on the vendor side. You might have a divide, a geographic divide in your executives, right? Like one lives in Europe and one lives in the US. Well, they might literally guide your company. It might seem like a split personality company, but you're a single security team that has to handle both. Or you're a company that the business believes in mergers and acquisitions. So it's constantly changing what you have to protect. Like 1 week we have to protect it, and next week we don't. And oh, by the way, we bought 2 more companies. What? And so there's this complexity and dependency and interplay that you in your program are in the best position to understand that complexity. And when you care about it, mixed with this idea of capability and getting better, that's the perfect. When you care to get better and are willing to be honest and tackle complexity, that the rest of this, pure gas.
Pure gas.
That's when you're ready for some of these outside concepts or approaches or techniques, because you know directly, does this fit in what I'm trying to do? Yes or no? Yes, it does. Here's how it fits. Perfect.
Yeah. And I think we'll end on that. The idea of pure gas, which is, again, let's strengthen your foundation, and then let's bring all of this together, all the investment, all the information, all the context, and do it in a repeatable and durable process kind of way. So with that, we'll wrap up. Check us out at outpost-security.com, which is our website. We have the Slack group that I mentioned earlier, and that sign up is at outpost-security.com/Slack-sign up. Of course, Stuart and I are both on LinkedIn. We have the RBA.community website we mentioned earlier as well, which is RBA.community. So again, thanks for tuning in and listening. Thanks for all of your support so far. I think this officially will be episode 5.
And here, not only like and follow, but also comments. So if this spurred some thoughts for you or unlocked maybe something that you were struggling with, would love to hear about it and share, like, hey, how does this help? Or was it nonsense? Like, hey, I'm totally happy. Oh, great. I would still love to hear that, because it just helps. It just helps round out what's going on out in the security world.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, with that, we'll sign off. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Outpost RBA podcast. Stuart McIntosh has over 20 years of experience building and maturing security programs inside Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, he gave a talk at Splunks.conf titled "Say Goodbye to Your Big Alert Pipeline and Say Hello to Your New Risk-Based Approach," which started the rise of RBA. As the creator and architect of risk-based alerting, he pioneers security methodologies at Outpost Security, which he co-founded with Will. Will Robus has spent the last 20 years in the operations or financial C-suites at technology and security companies, focused on what drives results and successful scaling. At Outpost Security, he works with CISOs to imagine a more expansive future for their SOC, once it has a solid RBA foundation. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share it with your security team and CISO. Connect with us on LinkedIn. And contact us at outpost-security.com to lift your team out of the fog of alert confusion with RBA 0 to 1.